Did you ever notice that the religious get even the simple stuff wrong? Atheists will say something really simplistic to them, and they'll tilt at the wrong windmill 100% of the time. It's almost like they're not listening or not comprehending what's actually going on. So today we have yet another example. The fail is strong with this one, so here we go. Today, we're back with Catalyzing Faith as we take on a local favorite topic, invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies. And how much do you want to bet that he's going to completely get every single bit of it wrong? I'll give you really good odds, I promise. Because this is standard theistic stuff. They take the most obvious atheist analogies to their faith and missed the point entirely, because these are not rational people. So let's go watch it unfold.
Welcome to Catalyzing Faith, where we seek to be a catalyst for your faith so that you can be a catalyst in the world around you.
Which still makes no sense, but hey, go ahead. Now, I'm doing this video specifically because he talks about what would be in our parlance, invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies. Now that comes originally from Matt Dillahunty, from whom I stole it shamelessly, or at least people liked the analogy, so I just kept on using it. But when someone is going to talk about something that I use on the channel regularly, hey, let's go take a look, right?
This series is called Catalyzing Questions, and in it we address many of the common questions and objections that you are likely to encounter in your Christian faith. And today we are addressing the question of, well, what about universe-creating pixies?
Yeah, what about them? Now, I'm sure he's going to wave his arms around and completely miss the whole point. That's very common after all. It's why the religious never understand the flying spaghetti monster. I will really be surprised if Catalyzing here gets it right. The whole point of this is to point out that their God isn't defensible. We can use every claim that they make, every tactic that they make use of, and apply it to a nonsensical, invented pseudo-deity which makes every bit as much sense as their own. All of the claims made by the religious, they don't lead to anything worthwhile. You've got a book? Hey, we've got a book too. You've got faith? Well, we can at least pretend to have faith. We care about fact, and all they care about is comfort. Using these pseudo-deities is a great way to prove it, even if it goes whoosh right over their heads.
One common objection that skeptics often raise against Christianity is this assertion that our appeal to God as an explanation is itself explanatorily arbitrary. They'll say something to the effect of, well, if you want to appeal to God as an explanation, then you may as well appeal to universe-creating pixies or leprechauns or some sort of supercomputer.
That's not quite it, but sure, we can talk about that. Why don't you do that? Why have you arbitrarily chosen your God as opposed to all the other gods that man has made up for himself to bow down to over the millennia? What makes your God special? Better question, what makes your God real? Now, they will offer a lot of reasons why they think their God is special, but it all really boils down to feelings. They like this God, often because they've been indoctrinated into belief in this God as children back when they had no clue how logic, reason, or critical thinking worked. That continues to be the case into adulthood for a lot of them, sadly. You don't just get to boldly claim that your God is X. No, my God, the God that I just made up is X. We can just play this game all day.
This is generally a response to a classification of arguments known as cosmological arguments that seek to establish that God must exist in order to explain the existence of the universe.
Not necessarily. I mean, it can also do that, and it does so very well. It applies to all religious philosophical arguments, in fact. For those who were around back when I did the gigantic list of religious philosophical arguments, you will recall that most of them ended with, "Therefore God." Well, what God? How do you know? Why not the flying spaghetti monster? Why not invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies? Why your God? And that's a question that they can't answer. So it does work that way, I will admit. It just has a much broader application.
One common example of this classification is known as the Kalam cosmological argument, and it's pretty simple. It goes like this. Premise 1. Anything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2. The universe began to exist. Therefore, we get the conclusion the universe had a cause.
And you leap, with no evidence offered, to your God being that cause. Why your God? Now, I'm sure he'll offer some kind of ad hoc explanation. I haven't seen that far yet, and hey, maybe I'm wrong, but this is absurdly common. Now, we've taken apart the Kalam many times around here, so I'm really not going to do it again, at least not in any depth. I want to focus on the last bit, though, where they just assume without evidence that their God, their specific God, is the God who done it. Where is their proof? Well, they have none. They don't even try. They don't care. And that's where putting up these obviously made-up gods works great. It counters their own obviously made-up God. But let's see what Catalyzing has to say.
But what could that cause be? This largely depends on what we mean when we say universe. And in the context of this argument, the universe is understood as all that is spatial, anything that is physical, all that is material, and everything that exists in time.
That might be what you mean, but that's not what any rational definition of the universe might be. Because when you talk to most atheists, in fact, most rational people at all, that's not what we mean when we talk about the universe. We live in a universe. It is probably one among many. The religious want to think of our universe as the only thing that has ever or will ever exist. It contains the whole of all conceivable existence. And I don't see how that's remotely justifiable, and neither does science. The most likely and mathematically defensible position, at least in my personal opinion, is that we are but one of a near infinite number of universes out there. They come into existence and go out of existence all the time. We are not special, which the religious need us to be, and therefore there's no reason to think that there are any gods, which the religious are desperate to believe in. But here's something that I think is important to point out. What you want to be true doesn't matter. And that goes for everyone. You, me, absolutely everyone. It only matters what is actually true. That's why it's so important to follow the evidence to where it leads without being poisoned by a mind-stopping worldview or religion. You can't start with a conclusion and then work toward it. That's not how intelligence works.
And from this, it follows that whatever the cause of the universe is non-spatial, non-temporal, non-material.
It means absolutely none of that. Our universe could have been sparked off by another. Other universes could have been sparked off by ours. What he's engaged in is bald rationalization, not intellect. He has a goal in mind, and he's doing everything he can to reach that goal, whether that goal is evidentially valid or not. This is exactly why all of the religious philosophical arguments fail. They're all doing the same thing, and people like Catalyzing have been doing it for so long, I don't think they even recognize why it's wrong anymore. As I've said, you cannot use philosophy to learn anything new about physical reality. It's the wrong tool for the job, but it's the only tool that they have. That's sad, isn't it?
To see a little bit more about why that is, let's think about another example. Imagine that we are inside of a video game, and we want to explain why the video game exists.
Please don't get into simulation theory. Please. Please.
it wouldn't make any sort of sense for us to appeal to anything inside the video game because, well, in order for anything inside the video game to be an explanation of anything, it must first exist.
Inside your video game. That doesn't mean they can't have properties that are consistent with other video games, because that brings us back to the unwarranted religious belief that we're the only one. It's also an unwarranted assumption that anything outside of our universe must be a god. That's foolish. It really is. From the perspective of a Neanderthal, if they saw us flying overhead in airplanes and driving around in cars and using weapons that killed at an extreme distance and all that, they'd think that we were gods. But we're not. We're just more advanced than they are. What if what the religious think of as their gods are just cosmic janitors who knocked over a jar of chemicals in a lab in another universe somewhere? That's your god? Really? That's what you bow down to? Give me a break.
And in order for anything inside the video game to exist, the game itself must exist.
Just to go with your analogy, you do know that computers can write computer code, right? Now, how would you know if you were in a video game that was written by another computer? This is like the plot from Tron if you think about it. You're just sitting there worshiping the users. But what if the users had nothing at all to do with it? So maybe there's just this universe-creating computer that's just been left on somewhere. Its creator's long since dead, and it's just been spitting out universe after universe or video game after video game, and you have absolutely no clue. Because that's really how you look. But anyway, back to story time.
So, whatever is the cause of the video game, whatever we can appeal to, it cannot have any of the properties that are exclusive to things inside the video game.
Nope, that does not follow at all. All of the examples that I've given can be perfectly physical and still have produced the universe. It's why their assumption is faulty to begin with. It's why assume makes an ass of you and me. Or just you in this case. It's a bad assumption to start off with, but I'll let him go on and make all the rest of his faulty claims based on the poor assumption in his head, and we'll get back to critiquing his position.
So let's get back to the universe. If the universe is understood to be everything that is physical, then whatever caused the universe is non-physical. If the universe is understood to be everything that is material, then whatever caused the universe is not material. If the universe is understood to be everything that is spatial, then whatever caused the universe is non-spatial. And if the universe is understood to be everything that is within time, then whatever caused the universe is not within time.
Alright, I really feel like I need to keep addressing this. Sorry. So let's try something else. Go to any room in your house. Close the door. Now assume that that room is the universe. Everything in that room is the universe. Well, there's stuff outside of your universe. The fact that you only have experience with what's in that room does not mean that there's nothing beyond that room. Yet that's exactly what the religious are assuming. Just because you can't open the door doesn't mean there's nothing outside of it. But this comes back around to the fact that they want there to be a God because the thought is emotionally comforting, so they just make up a bunch of stuff so they can make a case for there being a God, even when none of that stuff that they just made up is justifiable at all. And notice that he keeps saying, if we assume. Why? Why would you assume that? You can't base a rational model of reality on, I don't know, I just like the idea. Yet that's all that they're doing. And now that I think about it, aren't we supposed to be talking about invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies? Can we please get back to the topic?
So, what about pixies? What about leprechauns? What about supercomputers? How do they compare to these sort of characteristics?
The characteristics that you just made up. The characteristics you just assume. Because if you look at what the religious do, they just make a lot of things up and demand that's how it has to be. Because they like it. And that's stupid.
Well, a supercomputer we can eliminate right off the bat because a computer is an inherently physical object.
And just because it's beyond the door to your universe doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Besides, let's ask a realistic question. How do you know that? Why not a completely virtual supercomputer? I mean, we can come up with all kinds of possibilities if we just want to spitball it. But who says it's something that we can even imagine? Neanderthal, jet plane, figure it out. I mean, it may be so far beyond our comprehension, it may operate on physical laws we can't even wrap our heads around, that it's not even worth trying. And that's another thing. Now, we know that the religious think everyone is just like they are, no matter how silly that happens to be. But I've also noticed that they pretend that everything is just like it is here. All physical laws are our physical laws. Except I don't think that's how it actually works. It's as dumb as saying, well, the speed limit on the street outside my house is 35, so that means all speed limits everywhere are 35. Nope. Sorry, that's not the case. So, making all of these silly pronouncements about what you know about here, that says absolutely nothing about what might be true over there. Try again.
And that's obvious. So it clearly cannot be the cause of the universe. So what about pixies? Well, we need to sort of talk about what a pixie could be.
It could be anything. Any characteristics you staple to your god could be true of a pixie. They're both just made up after all. Now, I'm sure that he's going to try to define a pixie so that it can't be what his god is. That's what I'd do if I was in his position after all, but we'll see if I'm right and talk more about it after he does it.
Now, we all know they don't exist.
Just like your god.
But the reason pixies can be used in this sort of sense as an objection is because we all have this concept in mind of what a pixie would be if it did exist.
And that's wrong. The reason pixies are used is because it's something that we have a concept of. But you don't have to use that if you don't want to. Like I said, there's the flying spaghetti monster too. That's not something that we have a concept of. And I've used Bobo the tree god who used to live in my backyard. That's not something people have a concept of. We use pixies because it makes conversation easier, but it's not something that you can just try to define out of existence because of your preconceived notions. It's a word. It's a concept, and we can arbitrarily assign any characteristics to the pixies just like you can do with your god. It's the whole point of why we're doing it. It's something we made up to prove that you just made yours up too. It's really kind of funny that you can't quite grasp that, isn't it?
So off the top of my head, I can think of a pixie as sort of this pink or purple being. It has somewhat translucent wings, kind of flies around sort of like a fairy. But right now, we've already run into a major problem.
No, you have. But you're doing it all wrong. It's why I use the pixies as I do. They are invisible and intangible, which means you can't detect them in any way. And as a consequence, you can't disprove them in any way either. Just like your god. They create universes. It's in the description. They can make universes because I say they can make universes, just like your deity can make universes because you say he can. No proof required. And I call them pixies because it's an easy to remember word. You could use anything. Make it up. It doesn't matter. Because ultimately, you are missing the entire point. This is something that we made up to show that what you've also made up is laughable. We yanked it right out of our asses, and so did you. That's the point. It's funny how you can't see it. It's funnier that you think we're serious.
Pink, purple, those are colors. Colors are attributes of physical objects.
Says who? The sky is blue. Is the sky a physical object? Think, Bueller, think!
Wings are also physical objects.
We never said they had wings. You did. Or at least I never said they had wings. I don't know, you're using your concepts and your preconceptions to color your interpretation. This is just your preconceptions getting in the way of your understanding. It's why I never thought he'd be able to get this right.
If we have a fairy that is flying around or a pixie that is flying around, well, then it is moving through time and space.
Not necessarily. Maybe time and space are moving around it. Remember, this is just a thought experiment. I can arbitrarily assign any characteristics I want to the pixies, and there isn't a damn thing you can do about it. It's the same thing that you do for your imaginary friend. That's the point of this whole thing. Figure it out.
So, right off the bat, we have an object that is physical, material, spatial, and temporal. So, pixies are 0 for 4 of the necessary characteristics in order to be a cause of the universe.
My friend, I'm sorry, you have completely left the reservation. This is like watching nerds argue Star Wars versus Star Trek and thinking they're imaginary. None of it is real. We are talking about our imaginary made-up thing versus your imaginary made-up thing. But you're taking it all seriously, and we're not. Think about this. I mean, try.
We could do the exact same thing with leprechauns, and you're pretty much going to run into the same problem. You will be 0 for 4.
No, you just redefined the leprechauns to have different characteristics. I can do whatever the hell I want. I can discover a new species of insect and declare that to be a leprechaun. Bugus leprechauни, I guess. There you go. You're getting hung up on terms and not understanding concepts. Knock it off.
And we can run through this experiment with any proposed alternative to God that the atheist wants to throw out there.
But you haven't proven God. You're doing just what we're doing. You've invented a thing, or you've bought into something that somebody else has invented. You've hung a label on it that you happen to like, and now you're stapling a bunch of characteristics to it that you enjoy because you really want this thing to exist. But you can't prove that it actually exists. It's just a concept that you made up in your head. We recognize what you're doing. You don't, but we do. That's why we made up flying spaghetti monsters and magical pixies, to show that we can do the exact same thing that you're doing. We just don't think ours is real. Ours has no more validity than yours does. That's the point.
And one of two things will happen. I assure you, it's only one of these two things. One, they'll start to describe some sort of characteristic that itself is incompatible with being an explanation for the cause of the universe.
Says who? Some extra-dimensional Harry Potter analog waved its magic wand and poof, there was a universe. That's what you describe happening, if you remember. There's nothing incompatible about that by your own reasoning.
Or two, they will start to describe a non-physical, non-spatial, immaterial, and non-temporal being. In which case, welcome to theism.
No, because we don't believe it. Honestly, Catalyzing, I thought you were smarter than this. I really did. I had some hope for you, but apparently I was wrong. It isn't that hard. We're pointing to things that are as utterly absurd as what you believe and asking, well, why not that? Now, we don't think for a second that any of these things are legitimate explanations. You are entirely missing the point. We are not seriously proposing alternate hypotheses. We're pointing out that your own beliefs are absurd on their face. If you can just make something up out of whole cloth, which is exactly what you've done, so can we, and ours are no different fundamentally than yours. We can achieve something that you can achieve just by saying, that sounds good. Click. One more unwarranted and undemonstrable characteristic onto the pile. You're doing it, so are we. That's all you've been doing all along, and you're so emotionally invested in your beliefs that you act like a little child with an imaginary friend. They believe their imaginary friends are actually real. And we, like parents, going into a child's room and sitting on the bed and pretending to have our own imaginary friends so that hopefully the child realizes just how silly it all is. And you don't get it. If yours is real, why not ours? We're just doing what you're doing after all, but you can't see that. You refuse, and that just makes it all even sillier. You ought to be embarrassed by that. You really should. You won't be, but you ought to be. We can see exactly what you're doing. You can't, and that ought to be shameful. Think about it. This really isn't that hard. The fact that I had to explain it to you... You don't have any idea how sad that actually is. It really is. Go sit in a corner and think about how badly you failed. We're going to be over here rolling our eyes.